Greetings everyone, and welcome to today's seminar. Given the recent updates that have taken place in State of Decay 2, today we'll be going over a series of survival tactics / cautionary notes that have helped me in my journey through the lethal plague territories. I'm Londononion.
And I'm Mascara Onion.
Junior, let's get started. So first things first, Plague Territories have created some significant changes to the gameplay this Onion is used to. So naturally, some of my past guide points may be modified or completely scrapped, as they may no longer be much of a viable tactic.
Well, there are two main tactics that come to mind that may not be as useful anymore. In your advanced guide, you suggested that survivors create an outpost close to a heart so that the safe zone radius covers the heart location and disrupts the spawning patterns. With Plague Territories, this is no longer a viable option. Second, you recommend when facing ferals to sprint more and dodge less, so as to avoid accruing plague infection. But Update 25 and beyond seems to have handled the hit detection bug.
You bring up a couple good points, Mascara. Yes, the safe zone / plague heart method seems to be a strategy of the past, at least as far as I'm able to observe. In regards to sprinting or dodging with ferals, although dodging is less of a dangerous option, I would still admonish you guys to use the brief sprinting method more often than dodging. Dodging takes up more stamina than sprinting and makes a follow-up attack more difficult than the sprinting method. But that will be for another seminar. But now, on with the guide points. The first one I had to learn rather quickly, and that is, prioritize the acquisition of heavy weapons. You see, Plague Territories are the main hurdle between you and any safe zone, outpost, and or base. In the early game, one has very few resources, and consequently, attempting to craft the necessary quantity of explosives or incendiaries will be impractically taxing, and a tactic I would advise against. For those that attended my Plague Heart Damage Percentage expositional guide, you'll know that heavy melee weapons are a viable option for taking down hearts with minimal cost of resources. Your greatest threat will of course be the Zeds that come pouring in.
By extension of this one, London, heavy melee weapons when used with the powerhouse skill makes this method much more efficient. But should this be priority 1 with fresh survivors in the lethal zone?
Fair question, Mascara. Now, we've stated this in the past, but one of the first things to try and find is a firearm, and enough plague samples to create a cure. I'd recommend this before actually attempting to go for hearts. So consider heavy weapons to be an additional to the first things to look for. Now, with that said, accruing plague samples will actually be much easier than pre-Update 25 because Plague Territories are mostly packed with Plague Zeds. But this will lead to our first cautionary note. That is, to choose your hearts carefully. The first 3 hearts one takes out are crucial because they will have the least relative resistance of Zeds. Afterwards, the margin for error shrinks significantly, having a greater demand on one's raw skills in hand-to-hand combat. So it may actually be more beneficial to tackle hearts perhaps near a favorable base, or an outpost that could be beneficial.
But London, sometimes Plague Territories can have as many as 8 hearts, which of course supersedes the 3-heart rule. Plus, based on what we have observed in your recent walkthrough, there is usually a small number of hearts close to one's tutorial home. Meanwhile, any other external regions have a random set of hearts in their respective Plague Territories.
Hence why I say this is more of a cautionary note. Although one should always take into consideration the new updates that have come up. Hearts can no longer be packed as tightly as they used to be, and there seems to be a cap of having 30 hearts or less, in the lethal zone that is. Sometimes it may be more beneficial to clear out the hearts close to the tutorial home so as to free up outposts for resource production. As stated in our news coverage, styles will now be more complex, and a natural byproduct of this is that styles will be more fluid and less algorithmic, let's say. So take this as a note, not a directive. Now continuing on, In the early game, resources are always off to a rough start, meaning that crafting is likely not much of a viable option, but there is one option that virtually anyone can use. A directive I would give is to get used to using Firecrackers. Firecrackers are primarily meant for distractions, which is of course a good tactic, but as an alternative method it works as an incendiary as well, on stationary Zeds that is. During my recent playthrough, I had found myself swamped and surrounded by a series of Zeds while perched up on my damaged vehicle. Now, regular incendiaries damage a vehicle, Firecrackers do not. Throwing Firecrackers down, however, will set a big enough crowd ablaze starting with just one Zed. Plus, they only cost 20 crafting parts. Just mind the flames.
I remember you employing this strategy. It's similar to the contagion method you use for infestations from your advanced survival guide. But there were also some limitations. Firecrackers, like a lot of other throwables, can be bouncy and could consequently be a misfire. Additionally, if the Z saturation is not large enough, it will be difficult for the flames to spread.
Very true, Mascara. Chances are, if the Zeds are too spaced out, the crowd is likely not big enough to warrant this method. But on occasion, when perched up on inaccessible areas, Zeds will remain stationary, even at a distance, and simply scream since they have nothing else to do. In these cases, they may also be too spaced out to spread flames amongst each other. Carrying on, another directive I have for you guys, or at least one I would admonish one to learn, is, well, I mean, you guys have probably heard this one enough, the Foxtrot. For those that have followed my recent walkthroughs, you'll notice this strange maneuver I kept performing, especially when attempting to escape. The Foxtrot is essentially a faster way of traveling without having to use nearly as much stamina, and it can be performed indefinitely regardless of one's health, stamina, or plague infection level. Some of you may recognize this one from my advanced survival guide, but some may have a hard time understanding how to perform this maneuver consistently. Timing and rhythm is everything, and I'll try to be as thorough as possible explaining this one. First, get a running start. Then you will perform a jump. After landing, your chosen survivor will perform a stumbling animation. Knowing when to jump next is crucial. The survivor will land on their lead foot and stumble on the other foot, and they will resume the regular sprint animation afterwards. Just when the second foot lands is when you will jump again, and you will be propelled forward much faster than a sprint. You'll know that you're doing it correctly when you no longer have to hold down the sprint button, but simply hold forward while jumping in the same rhythm. It'll take some practice, but I would argue that it is worth knowing if you're out of stamina stimulants or are severely injured while requiring a quick getaway.
Evidently, this seems to have worked out consistently for you, but we can't forget the limitations. The Foxtrot does not work very well on uneven terrain, it cannot be used to outrun a feral, nor is it a viable option with juggernauts if running in a straight line. Lastly, beware of surrounding Zeds, as the jump command is also used for kicking in close combat, which may prompt a given survivor to lock onto a Zed rather than resume with the Foxtrot.
Perfect assessment, Mascara. The Foxtrot isn't a trump card, but definitely a valuable one. Carrying on with strong cards, one of the old tried and true tips is of course to arm your survivors, ideally with 50 caliber weapons. Now, this is still a directive, but a hard lesson I had to learn is to make space for 357 and 44 caliber rounds. Weapons with this caliber typically pack a very hard punch and have a higher rate of fire than 50 caliber weapons. Allies using weapons with low fire rate will have a hard time dealing with a high volume of Zeds, and this could lead to their demise. 357 and 44 caliber weapons, however, can still pack a punch enough to take down a Juggernaut efficiently.
I remember this moment during your walkthrough. A survivor holding a 50 caliber weapon died, likely due to the high volume of Zeds and a low fire rate weapon. But it's also important to note that only 50 caliber weapons can stumble a Juggernaut, or kill a feral in one shot.
Very true, Mascara. as long as there's a healthy balance of weapons. Moving on, the early game is when the most things can go wrong. Whether it's an unfavorable encounter with a feral, a juggernaut wandering into base, or a fellow survivor biting the dust. Now, there are the common ways of losing survivors, but there is one crucial aspect that makes the early game even more cumbersome. Morale. Morale can tear apart a community as effectively as the plague or a number of unfortunate freaks. This naturally becomes exacerbated with plague territories since it is much more difficult to move around, acquire outposts to boost production, and ultimately increase one's ability to build and forage their way through their map. Minding your morale is extremely crucial with these new plague territories given how inhibiting they are. Part of minding one's morale is knowing how to increase it quickly. Eliminating a juggernaut, feral, or horde can provide a small boost for a short amount of time. Healing survivors with severe injuries can also neutralize related morale penalties. Destroying a plague heart, of course, can provide a boost for a short period of time, and even something as simple as a latrine for one's base can all be good strategies to keeping your survivors happy enough until you can move or optimize your circumstances.
All of this put together, while of course managing your infestations, should keep one at least stable in their morale levels, but also be sure to vet your survivors carefully to ensure they aren't too dysfunctional.
On to our next point as an honorable mention, a little dysfunction is always okay, provided that it can be compensated for in other ways. This is commonly found with Red Talon. As I've stated in the past, I highly recommend investing in Red Talon, whether it be the facilities or the operatives, or both. I can't speak for everyone, but so far I would argue the most useful operatives would be those with gut packing, for decreasing food consumption and potentially increasing plague resistance, foraging, for a unit of food and meds plus the potential hero bonus for decreasing food consumption, infrastructure, which acts as utilities with both specializations and provides materials, firearms maintenance, which could provide 2 units of ammo with the right hero bonus, and mobile operations, which provides fuel, greater fuel efficiency, and knowledge of mechanics. Each of these skills could easily aid with your resources, or add to them in a crucial manner. Not to mention, Red Talons are essentially the best of the best with combat and versatility.
This is all true, London, but I think it's also important your guests understand the dysfunctional side of Red Talon operatives. The Gut Packer initially decreases plague resistance for the whole community. The Forager is not guaranteed their meal plan hero bonus. Infrastructure slows action speed times. Firearms is not guaranteed to provide 2 units of ammo. And mobile operations, along with the other Red Talons, can waste their respective resource depending on morale levels. But given how different Update 25 and beyond has made the campaign, anyone can use their discretion with any Red Talon agent.
Absolutely. There are far too many variables to say that there is only one way to do something, especially with how versatile Red Talon is. Now guys, please be aware that these survival tactics for Update 25 and beyond are not exhaustive, but a reflection of what I have learned from my experience with Plague Territories, of course in tandem with my previous survival guides for the Lethal Zone.
Just to summarize our talking points for today, you admonish that survivors prioritize the acquisition of heavy weapons, along with finding plague samples and a firearm. Choose your first few hearts carefully. Use firecrackers as makeshift incendiaries. Learn to foxtrot to escape crowds. Equip a mixture of 50, 44, and 357 caliber weapons on your survivors when possible. Understand the different tools for raising/maintaining morale. And invest in Red Talon. Just be sure to understand their risks.
Thank you, Mascara, for the summarization, and thank you guys for attending today's seminar. We do have plenty more to discuss, but I think that should be enough for today. One more thing, guys, before we adjourn. For those interested in more of an in-depth case study, I will be going live on YouTube where you can all view these survival strategies manifested in a natural environment. But not to worry, I will still be hosting more seminars for the latest updates and the challenges they bring. Otherwise though, that is all this onion.
And this onion.
That is all these onions have to say. Thank you for attending, guys, and I'll see you in our next seminar.